Good day and welcome back to My Culture Story podcast with Kado Muir. In this episode, I'm going to talk to a cross-cultural communication seminar as part of continuing professional development for lawyers. So hi there, My Culture Story mob and participants on this continuous professional development session. And I'm coming to you today to talk about cross-cultural communication in negotiations and sharing my insights and perspectives to you, the viewer, in relation to some key questions presented to me earlier. Yes, so the first question in this seminar is asking the question, yes, so good day and welcome back to this cross-cultural communication seminar. So before we start, just a little bit about myself. I mean, I've been doing cultural awareness training now for nearly 30 years. Started way back with when Lee Clifford was transforming Rio Tinto, CRA into Rio Tinto, and I was part of a group of First Nations, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and others, including famous geographers like Richie Howard and resource negotiators like Kieran O'Farkley. And we got together to deliver cross-cultural awareness training to the senior executives of CRA back in the day. And that was well over 20 odd years ago. I think recent events may have shown that they may have well needed continuous professional development, but that's another story. So in my role and capacity today, I am a native title holder. I am active in a number of native title determinations, but also one could say vertically integrated through the native title processes, from being a native title holder, having participated in federal court proceedings, both as a self-representation, currently part of a negotiation team on a matter that's that's confidential and without prejudice, so I can't talk about that. And also on a national level, am part of the National Native Title Council, currently the chair, and so have this perspective, I suppose, from the very beginning of cultural heritage management as an anthropologist and archaeologist, a cultural awareness trainer, and also active in native title in its various forms. So with that respect, I have some, I suppose, awareness and understanding of cross-cultural communications in the native title space. And thank you to the organisers for this particular seminar. I'm able to come and offer and share some of my insights into cross-cultural awareness and communication. So the first question is, how important is it to you that proponents have some understanding of your group's culture when negotiating land use projects? Now, this is quite an important and significant perspective and question. It always helps for people to be actually working off the same term sheet. And in a cross-cultural context, you're not always working off that same term sheet, for want of a better word. So look at it from this perspective. If the parties, and invariably that's the case here in Australia, come from very, very different cultural perspectives. On the one hand, we have white Anglo-Saxon Australians who come from a deep-rooted history in Europe, and in particular in England. And many of you as participants in this course, and most white Australians, probably don't value or appreciate the extent to which that cultural domain or those cultural perspectives influence your daily behaviour. And, you know, it permeates through the entire interaction between people from a, mainstream Australian cultural perspectives, when you're actually dealing with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have a deep-rooted, enduring connection to country, have a fairly sophisticated and nuanced cultural system of relationships, and then of course a connection to country. So in terms of this question, how important it is that proponents have some understanding of groups' culture when negotiating Indigenous land use agreements, the first simple basic answer is we really need everyone to be on the same page, and therefore having some level of cultural awareness or understanding, both from where you come from personally and individually, where you come from as a group in terms of your corporate culture and your societal culture. And then, of course, having an understanding and awareness of where the Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander native title holders are coming from. And so one of the first steps I have found in my groups that I work with is truly understanding what a welcome to country is. And a welcome to country, in some respects, is, in our language, we call it babula. But that's actually a exercise of responsibility from a First Nations perspective, in that we become responsible for you as hosts when you enter and come onto our land. This extends from a good manners perspective, so from the foundation of Kunda, the system of good manners and respect, right through to the spiritual domain, where if something were to happen to people on our land, their spirit will remain on our land, will haunt our land and our people and our communities until such time as those spirits are dealt with in a manner of release. And I think, just as an example for that, there's a video, and I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but if you did a Google search on, I think it's policing in the Nganyadera lands, with Daisy Ward as one of the key elders. And they go through this example of someone having passed as a result of a car accident on the traditional lands out there, and the spirit of that person remained on the land, interacting with Aboriginal people. And the only way that they could release that spirit was to bring the family of that person out onto country and go through a ritual or a process of reconnecting that spirit with their family. So in that way, it may not be, if you're an atheist or if you don't believe in these sort of things, it may not be fitting with your worldview. But having some understanding of the group's culture when negotiating land use projects will give you an understanding of where people are coming from when we are seeking to negotiate, certain terms and conditions which may be not readily recognisable within the the legal parameters or within the way in which it's defined or understood to be, the meanings are understood. But that's part of that whole idea of having an understanding of groups' culture when negotiating land use agreements, because we may be using the same language in terms of English, but the definitions are informed from a cultural perspective that is often outside of the understanding and awareness of participants. So this understanding of groups' culture can work both ways. It's important for us as Indigenous peoples to understand how non-Aboriginal people operate, but it's also important for non-Aboriginal people to understand how Indigenous peoples operate. So just summarising that, some of the key things would be having some awareness of how people welcome you onto country, having some awareness of the history and the interactions over time through the various mediums of the settler state, whether it's frontier violence, whether it's policing having perpetuated some of that frontier violence, the role and actions of missionaries, the role of government agencies, the role of mining interests. Each one of those influence the manner in which future and current engagements between First Nations native title holders and anybody seeking to engage or interact on their country as beneficiaries of securing native title agreements. So it's an important concept, and I recommend continuous learning in this area, but they're just some of the flagging that I can do at this point. Okay, so back to the next question. How does an understanding of your group's culture influence the way negotiations are conducted and the likelihood of an agreement being reached? So this can include, decision-making processes, can include authorization, can include actual manner of engagement. So there are protocols that you might need to follow in terms of interpersonal interactions, things from and in some of the traditional remote communities, one of the key things is asking the organisers or the people that are facilitating the hosting of your attendance, asking them one simple question: can your name be spoken aloud in that community? So, that's a simple thing. It may not be readily understood, but often having someone with the same name as you passing away, that name becomes a dead person's name, Kumanjay, Kumano, Nyabaru, and therefore by coming in and if you were to speak your name aloud, that could cause hurt, pain, and offence to affected families. So that's one thing, that's just one point right at the outset. Find out if you can use your name in a particular community. Now, in other ways, decision-making processes, the right to speak, these all strike back to fundamental native title, labelled as native title rights. So there would be the rights to speak for country, the rights to make decisions, the rights to pass on knowledge, the rights to teach. So in that, the bundle of rights model, each of these is part of the culture that influence the way negotiations are conducted. And then, of course, the authorization, the governance systems, and the decision-making processes where families are given the opportunity to engage and participate and be informed. So those things like free, prior, and informed consent, which are universal human rights principles and values, definitely find an outlet or a manner in which those are expressed through the cultural, cross-cultural dialogue that you'd be engaged in as part of reaching an agreement. So it's very important to understand each group's cultural influence, because around those really core topics around in the negotiations of representation, participation, decision-making, and then, of course, authorization. Those core things around reaching an agreement are actually heavily and strongly influenced by the group's culture. So it's very important that these concepts are understood, are factored into the manner and the way in which you present and participate in negotiations, how you resource the negotiations. So very important points for consideration. Okay, well, we'll move on to the next question. Well, here we go. Do you have any examples, non-identified, of where a good understanding of cultural issues has resulted in better negotiation outcomes, or process and outcomes? And then the second part of that, or where misunderstandings over cultural issues have caused problems in the negotiation? Well, that makes it a little bit easy for me to answer, because non-identifying, of course, there are many examples or instances, but examples that resulted in better negotiation process and outcomes. So it's, I think, fair to say that in most negotiations that occur, it's fair to say that parties do not come into those negotiations well informed, well versed in cultural issues. And even for myself as an Aboriginal person, if I were in another part of Australia interacting with other Aboriginal people, I wouldn't be able to say the same. I wouldn't be able to say that I have a strong or well-versed understanding of cultural issues. And there is a process that I use in a lot of my consulting and other forms of engagement, which is built around this concept of the acronym of respect. And this is a process that I've borrowed from a Native American author and researcher and negotiator in Canada. But the RESPECT, an acronym, stands for research, evaluate, strategize, present, customize, and transform. Using each one of those, you're able to then drill down into researching and understanding cultural issues, researching and understanding who the people are that you're dealing with. It's a process of finding out all the information beforehand, doing some evaluation on it in relation to what it is that you're trying to engage in, whether it's a negotiation or a consultation or something like that, or a presentation, a community meeting even. So research, evaluate, strategize around it. So what are the strategies involved in going to a presentation? So then you go to present, RESP. Once the presentation's done, it may be a roaring success, or it may be an abysmal failure. You do the presentation, you evaluate what happened. If it succeeded, good for you. You could evaluate and maybe make some improvements. If it failed miserably, evaluate and make some improvements as well. Identify where it fell down, what happened, and then you go into customizing that approach, customizing it again and transforming the approach, and reset, go back to the beginning. So using a methodology like that, which I use in my sort of consulting work and training and advisory services, that will result in a better negotiation process and outcomes. And in doing that, coming back to the original point, first point I made in this answer, it starts with none of us are going to be fully versed or fully prepared going in. We need to engage in this kind of retrospective or reflective, I think, reflective processes. But definitely coming to a point of understanding and understanding what the cross-cultural issues are, that improves your negotiation process and outcomes wholeheartedly. One non-identified example, I suppose, is in relation to one of the native title groups that I am a member of. We're able to negotiate the design and potential development of a mine, having come to a point of strong understanding of where environmental and cultural heritage factors are, strongly felt, strongly held, and we're able to communicate the serious importance of that, which then resulted in the company redesigning their footprint of their project. So being able to inform their designers, etc., to actually take those heritage and environmental values into account. So that's a classic example. There are other examples of misunderstandings over cultural issues. One of the common one, it's like garden variety cultural conflict. The going back into the deep dark history of mining and Aboriginal relationships. The miners would be saying, "Oh, there's a sacred site appears every time a development occurs, or whenever there is a deposit." Aboriginal people, on the other hand, go, "Yeah, these miners are basically looking to drill and destroy all of our sacred sites." And invariably, what you find, the places of value from inherent cultural perspectives are often also the points or the areas that see the accumulation of natural resources and other commodities of interest. So I think that's where misunderstandings over cultural issues, which can be informed by historic and contemporary trauma, the power imbalances and the reactions that go with that, whether you're trying to rectify and reset a power imbalance, all of those sort of contribute to misunderstandings and can cause problems in negotiations. So, end of the day, come back to looking at methodologies like I've outlined earlier around the RESPECT, and that's not the song, but it's a methodology, using things like that and keeping an open mind and an inquiring mind, so that if there are issues that emerge, that is not the end of the matter. That's just a beginning point for another level of discovery, another level of understanding leading towards positive solutions and outcomes. So, yes, there are some examples which I cannot identify, but understanding of cultural issues can result in better processes, better outcomes, and where there are misunderstandings, let's just work around them and find ways to be effective. Yes, well, folks, so thank you for sticking with me all this time so far. The final question we have is, what is the main message you would like to send to proponents about the best way to approach negotiations with traditional owners from a cultural understanding point of view? Key thing, do not be afraid. Engage, participate, communicate. They're probably the key messages. Be open and willing to learn, to understand, and adopt methodologies like I'm proposing, which I think that's what Tesla use these days, is the agile management methods of constantly seeking feedback on how your project, your activity is rolling out. If there's things that need tweaking, do it there and then. Of course, not losing sight of the overall objectives, but being flexible to make changes on the ground at the time. One of the key things too for proponents is that you're actually engaging and interacting on a cultural level. So you've got to make sure that the people who are participating in negotiations or in the communications are of the appropriate authority from your company to interact with the appropriate authority from the native title or traditional owners side. All the other stuff that I've said in this presentation about cross-cultural awareness, cross-cultural understanding, cross-cultural engagement is true and important. But I think the main message here is not to be afraid, because when you're afraid, you make poor decisions, you make mistakes, and you basically end up in a situation where simple things which did not need to happen may bring these good relationships undone. And that's an unfortunate thing for everyone engaged in these processes. I think, of course, there is the understanding that the Future Act process, a lot of these negotiations is built around the idea of the Crown taking native title holders' lands, suppressing our rights and giving it to a third party, which are often your clients or your organisation. And so there is a transaction that occurs between the parties to balance out that I'd say probably injustice, but I don't think that's the right word. The word I'm looking for is infringement, I suppose. Balance out that infringement. So in our culture, that's a process we call ngabiti or ngabitiga, ngabiti, the different terms that are used, um, uh, which is a process of reciprocity. So there are so many cross-cultural perspectives that could be brought to play. I think in this presentation so far, I've introduced concepts like ngabiti, kunda, which is respect, relationships, nyamiri. Each one of these are socially grounded cultural institutions within Aboriginal society that have a very strong influence on the interactions between traditional owners / First Nations and third parties who are often beneficiaries of a process by which the state or the Crown is taking native title lands and giving it to these third parties. So the main message is to really understand those interactions, to understand where compensation is for rebalancing relationships, restoring relationships. And there's also then possibly transactions around access and then relationships going forward, which are built on a balanced and harmonious interaction that strengthens and enhances. So I think the key message, the key takeaway for everyone here is that when you're engaging with traditional owners, you are engaging with another culture. You're engaging with another history, and you're engaging with another people who occupy the same time and space, but come into these interactions from a completely different perspective. So they're the things that we really, really, really need to be aware of. And it's very important that these engagements are approached sensitively and maturely, and with a lot of elements of respect and reciprocity. Well, so that's all for now. Here are my contact details. If you want to find out more, you can come to my website, www.kadomuir.com.au, and find out a bit more about my podcast series. I haven't been broadcasting a lot recently, but you will find some good episodes in the back catalogue there. www.myculturestory.com.au. Okay, Belinda, we'll move on to the final screening. Mula na ku.